Ladies and gents, welcome back. We've gotten into the final stretch of this inquiry. We're now speaking with the ministers of the federal government, and there's some things that are coming out while we're seeing in this, and there's other things that are being, hidden, it seems, redacted or left to the very last minute to submit to evidence. And today, to talk about that, I brought in Keith Wilson to address this issue. Now, Keith, we saw what happened. Pardon me, I got the same cold you've got now, so we're both going to be struggling through this. But Brendan Miller was ejected from the inquiry yesterday, and I did a video about it. And let's just hear where are we coming from? Why did this happen? How was it that he got so frustrated to the point where he was talking over the commissioner?
So the context for this is really important. The previous week, we had brought an application, a written motion, to have the commissioner order the federal government to lift redactions that the government had placed over hundreds and hundreds of pages of important documents, particularly meeting notes from senior government officials when they were meeting with their bosses, with their ministers. So we get these documents, they might have a few words we could make out, and then it's black, and then a few more words and it's black. It was obvious on its face that they did not meet any legal criteria for redacting. So previous week, Miller brings the motion. The motion closed in terms of parties making submissions on it last Thursday night.
Now, the motion was to remove a lot of the redactions. That was the idea here?
That's right, to have the commissioner rule that the redactions were not proper and have them lifted so that we can have proper disclosure and transparency.
Now, just to cut you off so everybody understands what's happening here.
Sure.
You're talking about correspondence between a minister and their employees, not minister to minister, things that are covered under cabinet confidence. This is just all stuff that should be transparent.
Yes, and not to a lawyer, no solicitor-client privilege, no cabinet privilege, and so on. And some of these people were not cabinet ministers. There was one staff to another staff member. How do you claim cabinet privilege when no one from the cabinet's involved in the communication? So we were very much needing to see what was behind these redactions. Obviously, it was something sensitive that they didn't want us to see because we had CSIS coming to testify on Monday, and then we had Mendicino and all the other ministers that you've seen paraded out since. So we need to have this so we can do a proper cross-examination so that the public and the commissioner can discover the truth. That's what this is about. So Monday comes, and we still don't have a ruling. Late Monday night, we worked the team here till 1:30, 2 in the morning because we got another document dump from the federal government at the end of the day on Monday. Now, in a normal trial, this would never be allowed. As soon as the other party does that, they would adjourn, allow the parties to properly review the materials and so on. So here we're being deprived of the transparency of the evidence to properly cross-examine the senior government officials, CSIS, and the ministers.
You're talking about thousands of pages getting dumped on an office and desk, and here you go.
Yes.
Have at her.
Yeah, we broke it up. We break it up into sections. I remember I was laying on the couch with my laptop, and the other lawyers are sitting in these chairs, and we're all like trying to go on page after page after page. Okay, got something, put it in an email, figure out what we're going to do with it, submit it, because then we have to file it with the commission to let them know we're going to rely on it the next day, which is now already that day because it's the middle of the night. Anyhow, so one of the things that we're looking for, because we've seen this narrative emerge from documents that we got early on, that well before the convoy arrived, the federal government's workers, the political hacks in the minister's office and the ministers had already decided what the narrative was going to be. They were going to paint the truckers as extremists, as right-wing Nazis, all this sort of thing, racists, before they even arrived. And so one of the communications that was really important was the communication between the communications director of Minister Mendicino, between the minister and his communications director. what happened the day that Mr. Miller got removed from the hearing room was he saw that communications director was sitting in the hearing room.
So he was
And
right
he's like,
there.
all right, right there. Look, if you're not Mr. Commissioner, if you're not going to rule on my ruling to lift the redaction on whatever this Alex guy wrote, because that's his name,
Mm-hmm.
let's put him up on the stand and let me ask him about it. So Miller made a motion right on the spot out of frustration. You haven't ruled. I've got Mendicino here now. I got to deal with this. So give me a ruling that I can subpoena. You can subpoena this guy right here. You just got to say, sir, you're subpoenaed. Get up here on the seat and get sworn in. And the commissioner blocked him and said, make it in writing. Well, we've got 3 motions extending already. The whole hearing process is going to be over before we get any rulings. It's just becoming a joke. So, unfortunately, so Miller then after the break goes and stands at council's podium. So when commissioner comes in, he sees Miller standing there. What's going on? Miller then sought again to restate his request for a motion, an oral motion. Oral motions happen all the time in various legal proceedings. And that's when they started talking over one another, and Mr. Miller crossed the line of speaking over the commissioner, and he ordered security to have him removed. But it was done out of, just to explain it, Mr. Miller was trying to ensure that the document disclosure and the evidence would come out in a timely way so that Minister Mendicino could be properly cross-examined and the truth could come out. And that's why you heard at one point, the commissioner said, the schedule is the most important thing. And Miller said, no, the truth is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The truth.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of us,
truth needs
a lot of us that have been paying attention to this since the beginning, we saw these individuals that showed up, one with a Nazi flag and one with a Confederate flag, in all kinds, dressed right up, can't see who what their face is. And everybody saw it for what it was. It was somebody there just to create and sow the seed of these guys are bad people. And then it just so happens to coincide with a lot of the narrative that's going on from the government. They were trying to, and my opinion is that they were trying to discourage people from staying by creating this doubt of who these people are and lose the popular support. But the popular support didn't leave because people saw right through it. Now,
no, I think it was staged for the cameras. They wanted to be able to, they had already identified, again, early on, what the narrative they were going to do. And they had tested it with Global News. This is all in the documentary evidence that's come out in the last few days and late last week, that they'd done it with Global News, and Global ran this story. So all the pieces are there. So the question becomes, why is it that they investigated Tamara Leach right down to everything about her and Chris Barber and others to find out everything about them and their history and whether there's any ties to foreign influence? Why is it that they investigated and were able to identify people who donated $20? And they did all of these things because of their concern that they were all Nazis, but they never investigated the guys carrying the Nazi flags. Come on. Right?
It just, it reeks. It
reeks. They were planted. And the one guy carrying the Confederate flag, like, he literally looks like he just came from Mark's work warehouse. Like that gear he had on, and he made sure that every part of him was covered, even big oversized gloves. So you couldn't really tell how big he was, his dimensions. And he's parading back and forth in front of this CBC doing an interview with MP Cooper. It's just all too obvious. So they needed to perpetuate this image, that to taint the whole group. It became the justification for the invocation of the Emergencies Act we've largely heard. But when Mr. Miller cross-examined the head of CSIS and said, so you investigated everybody else, you investigated and you know who was carrying the Nazi flag, right? And he goes, oh, I'm not allowed to confirm or deny whether or not any investigation occurred.
So again, just muddying the waters. So we will never find out the truth waters, kind of thing.
And hopefully at some point we'll get to see all the unredacted documents, and we'll get to see whether there is a note saying, yeah, Political operatives are ready to go, flags are ready, they're going to be showing up on the 29th and walking back and forth in front of the Parliament building. Like that could be in those notes. And if it is, it shows the extent to which the Trudeau government is corrupt.
Oh, and the public has a right to know. Now, Hatim Kir, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Fantastic lawyer. He, when talking to Omar Algebra today, said the narrative from the government is that the charter was temporary and charter compliant, and we all know how much of a joke that is, the charter compliance. But what he brought up a really good point, because one of the things that they did was compel tow truck drivers to do the towing for them. Now, what Hatim brought up is he said that tow truck drivers compelled against their political conviction, in the sense that some of them were actually in support of the convoy itself, but they were being compelled. And Omar Algebra just dodged the question entirely. But so how does that fit with the charter?
Well, it's a great question, and Hatim's a phenomenal lawyer, as are many of the others who are here. It illustrates how arbitrary the federal government behaved. That's a very valid point, that you should not be forced to engage in something that's against your political views. That's not how we behave in a free and democratic country, particularly Canada that has a charter. But what this other thing, the whole thing illustrates, is when they talk about charter compliant, they consider the banning of over 6 million Canadians from getting on planes and trains in Canada to fly to be at the side of dying loved ones, or at the birth of a grandchild, or funerals and weddings, to be charter compliant too. The notion that the Trudeau government has of the charter, is that it's a tool of convenience for themselves. It's rights that they can speak virtuously about when they want to, like we saw recently in Ontario with the threat by the Ford government to bring in the notwithstanding clause for the strike by the support workers in the schools. But otherwise, it's just it's an annoyance. And I mean, how can you claim what they did to thousands of Canadians in busting up and beating up Canadians with police violence in February was charter compliant? How is it that they can say in a straight face, with legal authority, or legal accuracy rather, that banning Canadians from protesting on a sidewalk in front of Parliament is allowed under the Emergencies Act and is charter compliant? It's all nonsense. The bottom line continues to be that this government likes the laptop class, but they don't like blue collar, hardworking Canadians, and they take offense when that sector of our society challenges their actions. The federal government and the Prime Minister in particular were embarrassed by what happened in Ottawa, and he was going to show them. I mean, it's clear from so much of the evidence. Remember, there was an engagement plan that was presented to Cabinet, that was reviewed and approved by the OPP, the RCMP, and the Ottawa Police Service, to engage in a dialogue with the truckers in Ottawa, who happened to have a legal team with them.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. It's not like, well, who are we going to talk to? They had my phone number. I would have arranged the meeting. And they said, no, everybody recommended it. And the Prime Minister and the Cabinet said, nope, we're not going to engage with these people. We're not going to do the Canadian thing and sit down and talk. Instead, we're going to do the most un-Canadian thing and send in the armed police.
Well, and my argument would be because they already demonized them and they started calling them Nazis. So why would they speak with Nazis? Now we had...
Hence our very aggressive maneuvers this week
mm-hmm.
to expose that angle, despite all the obstacles thrown in front of us of blocking documents and not releasing things.
Right. And we have this correspondence here that came up today, and this is between Marco Mendicino and David Lametti. So we're talking about the public safety minister and the attorney general today speaking. You need to get the police to move and the Canadian Armed Forces if necessary, which has been said here. Now, I tweeted this out today, And this is David Lametti, while maintaining that there was no interference by police or with police, that said privately to Marco Mendicino, you need to get the police to move and the Canadian Armed Forces if necessary. This is, remember, the Attorney General of Canada talking to the Safety Minister to influence both police and military. Now, they went on to say, and most people were focusing on the other part of this, and this was the joke that they had made. How many tanks are you asking for? I just want to ask Anita, who is the Minister of
Minister of
Defense, how many we have on hand. I reckon one will do, and I believe that's a joke, a dark joke, referencing Tiananmen Square, if I'm not mistaken on that, and that's sort of how I took it anyway. Now, what was said by Rob Kittredge when he was doing cross-examination was to Anita Anand. He asked, basically, is this the kind of joke that your ministry does? Is this something that you stand by? But then when she gave the obvious answer, I don't stand by these jokes, this isn't my purview, she was asked to read the date on the statement. And the date here, if you scroll up to the top here, is Wednesday, February 2nd, which places us...
February 2nd.
This places us several weeks before they declared and invoked the Emergencies Act. So now this is starting to go more with the narrative of they had this planned all along, and they had no incentive to actually talk with protesters in the nation's capital, but yet wanted to bust some heads, or however you can put it.
That's the evidence, the documentary evidence that keeps coming out each day, backed up by the oral testimony and cross-examination of the ministers, of the police officials, of the government officials, of the political aides, is these protesters in Ottawa, Canadians from all walks of life, ethnic backgrounds, very, very troubled about government overreach and the harm that the government had caused to their families, their communities, their businesses, their local economies, their children, through 2 years of mandates at all levels of government, including the federal government. That's why they were there, and the government couldn't stomach it. Prime Minister had already vilified the unvaccinated, as we all know. Back in the previous year in August, in September of the previous year of 2021, called the unvaccinated misogynist, racist. How do we deal with these people? Should we tolerate them? Very, very inappropriate, dangerous language from a leader. And the events in Ottawa and the Trudeau government's treatment of Canadians is just a further continuation of his theme of dividing our country and behaving in the most un-Canadian ways that we can imagine.
Well, I don't even know where to go from there. Well, we'll see what happens with the rest of this inquiry. I want to thank you so much, Keith, for coming in today and talking with me, and hopefully we can keep our spirits up after what we've heard.
2 more days.
2 more days. All right. Thanks again, Keith.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you.
And thank you guys for tuning in. And, as always, there's the comment section down below. I invite everyone to go down and leave a comment and tell us what you think about this situation. It's just uncanny, the behavior of our federal government and just the lack of onus, the lack of transparency, the lack of wanting to get to the bottom of this and get to the truth and find out what's going on. They're just playing politics as usual. It's quite disappointing. Anyway, leave a comment. We'll see you in the next one. Keep on trucking.